monthly Zoom session. We're featuring this morning Bruno, K4. You didn't put it on there.
Oh, sorry, W4AFK. I'll do it.
W4AFK. And I've known Bruno for many years. He's involved in the commercial end of radio and quite active there, I believe. And so he's actually a very expert amateur radio operator, and he set up a remote station in Florida where he has it's a house there, I believe. So he's using Flex technology for his remote station. That's one of the things that the Flex radios do very, very well. Anyway, I would like to see if Cecil has anything to say for us this morning.
Good morning to the group. I'm going to maybe say a lot more than I normally do, just because I'm waiting for people to get connected and take full advantage of Bruno's presentation. So I thought I'd maybe give a few minutes background on why Bruno is here today and what led us to invite him here. And also he has volunteered to go to make a hands-on presentation at the San Diego meeting. I guess about a month ago, we had a PAPA member call me and said he was going to the hospital. He said he had a great HF station and he wanted to donate it to the group. I said, wow, it planted a seed in my mind. I said, that would be a great system to use, I thought at the time, for a remote. But the donator was Frank, WS6N, and I don't know if Frank's listening today or not, but he donated a great station. Bruno, myself, and others looked at it and decided that's probably not the system to use for what we want to do. Is the whole idea of the remote base UHF station is to try to entice PAPA members that are technicians to upgrade to general and actually provide them a good station that they would be able to use. And so that brought us to Bruno. Bruno was at a breakfast that we were making a presentation on the remote base that we were going to use at Yuma, and I talked to him briefly, and he said, yeah, let's get a group together and move forward on the project. Well, I got to tell you, the project has taken off. I've asked for participants at various breakfast and lunch, and they're all very interested. I've had generous donations, including Frank's station, and I think we're very close to having adequate funds for the project, and that's the reason why Bruno's here. We want to whet the appetite of PAPA members and then get this station up and make it available to the PAPA membership. And with that, I will share this with you. But maybe 20 years ago, I had the same idea and we put a remote, but I made a fatal mistake. I connected it to the repeater, and all of the old timers that heard all the noise from the HF jumped on my case and said, we joined the system because it's quiet. We don't want to hear all that noise. So it lasted about, maybe about a month and a half. And then I politely, because the system is for the use of the memberships, took the system down. But this will be a standalone system. Will have nothing to do with the operation of the repeaters. So there you go, David.
All right, very good. Yeah, thank you for that, Cecil. So I wanted to introduce Bruno, W4AFK, and it's all yours, Bruno. You can take it away.
Thank you for joining. Just to give a high-level view of what I'm trying to do today, what I'm going to present to you is one possible remote station, which I'm using myself. There are several out there. And this is more of an idea of if you're planning or thinking about setting up a remote station, the things you got to think about. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, I'll put a radio there, I'll put an internet connection and I'll operate it. But I just wanted to share with you the path we had to take over several years to build a station. We started small and we grew. So this presentation is one of them. And one thing I want to mention too, coincidentally, in this month's QST, I believe on page 63, coincidentally, there's a 2 or 3 page article on setting up a remote HF station. So it seems like what we're trying to do at Papa and what I'm doing here, what I've been doing for years, is becoming more and more popular, and I'll explain why. But it just coincidence. I was reading my QST yesterday and said, "Oh, look, there's an article in here now on that." So just wanted to mention that. Okay, so if I start, reasons to have a remote HF station might seem obvious, might not. Today's world, owning a home is becoming more and less and less affordable. People are moving into condominiums like I am. I'm in a condominium. So I said to myself, how am I going to do any ham radio from here? Apart from throwing a wire out the window, which works, by the way, how do I set it up? So there's that. And then when you have a house, more and more houses now are in HOAs, very restrictive rules. In Florida, I had the same situation. I had to have a very stealthy antenna or the HOA police would be coming down and giving me a note. So those are essentially reasons why you want to have an HF station. There are others too. For example, you want a quiet space, large antennas, but I'm just giving you a basic idea because for me, amateur radio is not just sitting at home and having a radio. It's trying to figure out solutions to problems. And the problem I had is, well, how do I operate from a condo? Okay, here's my solution. At home, we could have stealthy stations. If you see my cursor down here, there's a little loop antenna. I had a similar setup myself too when I was living in a condo elsewhere on the ramp, exactly like this. In Florida, I had this in an attic also. The one on the right, as you could see, if your apartment complex or condo permits it, you could set up antennas like that. But I doubt very much that here in California, anybody will be able to do this without receiving multiple visits pretty quickly for that. There are loop antennas. There's a whole series of antennas you could set up and install in an environment where you have just a balcony or a very small space. I do WSPR beaconing with 5 watts with a very similar installation, and I'm heard around the world. So there are ways to get on the air, but evidently it's not, if you want to participate in the contest or have QSOs, it's very tough to do when you're setting up like that. Oops, sorry. One important question, I've been asked this question many times by many hams in Florida and here too, are remote stations legal? So I just highlighted 2 bullets, FCC rules. Any station can be remotely controlled. But again, this is very simplified. Then the other one that applies is telecommand of amateur station. There's a few simple requirements, including the timeout and fail safes and so on and so forth. Just read the rules, but it is doable. There's nothing that precludes you from setting up an HF station. If you just plan accordingly, they don't want your station to go on the air and start and be full key down until your transistors blow up. So that's the basic rules of that. And when you're operating from outside the US, as you guys already know, if your radio is in the US, not a problem. But if you're operating the other way around, it was for me here, operating a station, for example, in AT or in Europe, I need to have an international agreement like a CPT. I need to have that in place. So I've traveled, I've been around the world, and I've operated my ham station from different countries, no problems at all. But if I set up a station like in Canada, I would have to have reciprocal. I have a Canadian amateur radio license, V2EQ, so I'm okay. But if I didn't, I would have to have that to operate, which is a different agreement. Contesting identification, I've seen this often, and I don't like it. What hams are doing, they decide they want to compete. They connect to a remote base, and then they say they're transmitting from their home location. So in reality, it's pretty obvious, but essentially, if you're operating remote, your transmitter is remote, so no matter where you are, it's different. The map on the right comes from my website, QRZ page. I'm on a West Coast DM13IE. I'm transmitting from EL97QX. So when I'm doing contests or whatever, I'm transmitting from Florida. I've heard too many times hams, maybe it's just because they lack training or something, but they would connect to a different remote base, not theirs, but a third-party base, which I'll talk about. And they essentially say they're operating from their home. And it kind of messes up when you're for competitions and stuff like that. Now, how you could play HF when you don't have space? There are essentially two ways. You could connect to an existing service. I call them pay as you go. They could be expensive. There's several of them. I wrote here remote ham radio. There's remote hams, and there's several others there that are available, which you could connect from home and either without a control head or just a computer operate a ham station. If you do not want to have the responsibilities of setting up a physical station at at another location, but you need to operate with, as you could see, antennas here like that, then you could join systems like remote ham radio and operate. I tried it at one point. The problem for me is that apart from the fee you got to pay to join, you've got a per minute fee. It could be 39 cents per minute, it could be 69 cents per minute. So if you are very active and start having fun with their very capable systems, like you see these stacked antennas, you could find out that at the end of your couple of hours, you've spent a lot of money. But it is a way to get on. So there are many hams that like to use that way because it's simple. They just connect to it, they pay a fee, and then they operate the radio. Remote ham radio has a very elaborate system and multiple sites. Antennas, they have different levels of membership to do it. But again, it is a pay as you go, and that all depends on what you want to do. The other way to play, which is what I did, is setting up a remote HF station. And the rest of the presentation will explain to you what I had to do, the steps I had to go to think about setting up this remote ham station. The picture on the right is essentially the radios I'm using there now, an amplifier. So I have a TS480 SAT. That control head is sitting on my bench, and you could see that on my, you'll see it at the picture later on. It's on my bench here. So when I operate, it is as if I'm in front of my radio. The full control head is there. On the bottom right is the Flex 6400. So I'm able to also operate the Flex, which is through a software package I have here. Bottom left is an amplifier. It's a an expert 1.3 KFA, which is 1.3 kilowatt, in reality, but 1.5 peak. So I have access to the amplifier. I like this amplifier because it has two radio inputs and 4 antenna outputs, and it has a built-in tuner to help take care of the load. On the top right are 2 little remote control boxes, which I'll explain to you how I use. Now, what I wanted to do to show at the bottom, I wanted to give you quickly a little bit of background on what I do professionally. Part of my work is configuring, coordinating the setup of remote HF, VHF, and UHF systems for diplomatic, strategic, tactical communication systems around the world. Most of them are split site systems, and we have them up to 20 kilowatt. On the bottom middle picture, that little shelter, which I can't tell you where it is, essentially, has 4 10 kilowatt transmitters. The boxes on top are 4 air conditioning units. 2 are always on. 1 is when it gets too hot. The 4th one is a backup. So those are 4 10 kilowatt, all solid state, by the way, transmitters. The antenna on the right is something which hams are not familiar with. It's called a spirocone. It's a elliptically polarized log periodic dipole array. And what it gives you is the equivalent gain of a log periodic antenna, but it's omnidirectional, and it has 2 takeoff angles. And I'll explain a little bit later what they're used for, but this is a very common type of setup when they need omnidirectional coverage with gain. And they need to either have NIVIS, higher takeoff angle, or longer distances, ground to air communications. When you fly overseas and you're flying over South America, and as you know, there's satellite, there's VHF, UHF, and when they're out of range of that, they're using HF. Guess what? Some of these transmitters you see in here are actually talking to the aircraft. So just to give you an idea, and they're using antennas like that. On the left-hand side, we have setups like that. They are also spirocone antennas. It's a huge antenna. That antenna has 4 antennas embedded, and I could feed 4 10 kilowatt signals into them simultaneously. So these are setups where they're only transmitters. Guys, you got to realize when you have systems like this, your receivers are in a very quiet area many miles away. That's how it's normally set up. But in this one, the antenna on the left, you actually have 4 10 kilowatts going into that, and they're all going into separate wire antennas that are strung between those. And they're huge. They're huge antennas, and it's definitely beyond amateur radio. But these are the type of systems we set up in addition to more simple ones. Evidently, setting up a station like this is way beyond amateur radio means, even for the remote control. But oddly enough, the concept is the same. You go through the same thought process when you set it all up. It's just, you know, these guys got money to pay for it. So that's a different story. This is a very elaborate picture. I'm going to be explaining you part of it, but this is my system today. And again, I'm going to come back to it a few times, but to give you an example, it didn't start like that. It started with a cable modem, a router, the TS480 SAT at the bottom, and then an antenna. And then we grew it over the years, and we added all these things. So I'll explain to you, but these are all essential parts of a system. Papa would not need all of that because evidently I'm controlling multiple antennas, multiple radios, amplifiers, and stuff. But in reality, we would be using a subset of that. But this shows you my configuration going through the HF antennas, the beam, the 6-meter antennas, and I'm taking advantage of both radios. Both radios have 2 outputs, so I'm taking advantage of that to go either to the amplifier or to go to the different antennas. So I'll come back to that, but just to give you an example of my system today, I looked at what it was at the beginning. It was like, oh my God, we grew this over the years as we improve. I say we because my host is a ham K4 SFP, and he uses this. And because I'm on the West Coast, he's on the East Coast, he plays during the daytime. When after dinner, he leaves, I go on and I start having fun essentially at my time. So we have a lot of fun. We both are able to share the system. Okay. Now I get into the nitty gritty of this stuff. The April 22 QST, that's done. I wanted to put a note there regarding an article they had in there. So careful planning. The first thing is finding a remote location that is RF quiet. It's useless to put it in the middle of a city where you have, 10 dB over S9 noise because you won't enjoy it. So it's find a remote location that is quiet, accessible, reliable power, and has a low latency, I say high speed, but nowadays, a regular internet connection. The latency is important. I'll explain to that later on, essentially, but I'm using a station here and I'm operating my remote in Florida and I don't have any issues. Nobody even notices that I have that I'm operating remote, and that's 2,684 straight line miles from the station. So, unless you have a very, very bad connection, or for example, using Starlink. If you're using a satellite link, you could have latency, which could cause some issues, which I'll explain. The second bullet, a sub bullet, if your station is within driving distance, 30, 40 miles away, fine. Like the Papa systems, you could go and maintain them. But as we know, if our station is remote and like we have some repeaters up on like Papa 7, it's not an easy thing to get there and to maintain it. So if you want to set up a remote HF station somewhere, you need somebody there that could be able to help you. Lucky for me, my friend, Alan, he's there. It's in his garage. It's set up there. He operates it. We share it. So if I have to do maintenance on the antenna or some minor things that I can't do from here, he would do it. So you got to think about that. Selecting the radio that could be easily remoted. Flex as a radio could easily remote. The TS480. There's a few others. There are other radios which they now have Ethernet ports, but you could control them remotely, but you don't have access necessarily to all of the features, all of the functions. So you just got to choose the radio you want to use. Some of the older radios are not convenient for that, essentially. They're to be designed for it. But any radio that you can control with software today, you could theoretically operate it remote. It's different layers of complexity. My radios, my TS480 does not have an IP interface. So I have to use external devices to do it. The Flex has a direct IP. I don't need an external device. The amplifier, same thing too. Mini hams, I started off with 2 amps. I've been a ham since 1970, so I've played with a lot of stuff too. But for me, tubes are finished. I am all solid state now. That's the way it is, even though my age is solid state too. Probably getting there too. I'm 68, so I'm playing with that. Evidently, if you want to do a remote setup, you want something that you don't have to start tuning and adjusting. A solid state amplifier is perfect for that. I started off with an Ameritron ALS 600S, and then I moved towards this SB expert amplifier now. But the advantages are they're solid state, they're very easy to operate. I don't have to worry about when I tune the band, I get the information, VisWar is okay, there are fail safes. This is what you want to do. The next thing is the type of antennas. Evidently, you're remote. You can't go and change antennas every day. So you got to figure out what do you want to have. If you want to have dipoles, that's fine. You set them up. I'll explain in a few slides the challenges there. If you want to have a log periodic and turn it, well, you got to plan for it, and you got to have the proper tools to be able to manage your antenna. And I'll show you how I'm doing that. The environment. For me, it's important. My station is in Florida, which is the USA's lightning capital. Little anecdote, by the way, when we had the lightning storm a few months ago here, and we were looking at neighbors going outside and looking at that and staring at it, and my wife and me looked at each other and said, yeah, they never live in Florida, because for us, it's the other way around. You run inside when there's lightning. So before I operate an HF station, my remote, I always look at the weather map, the local radar map. If there are thunderstorms nearby, I don't turn anything on. So that's one of the things you got to think about, depending on where you set up your station, what's the environment, check before you turn it on. I always do that. And then the last one, unfortunately, having enough understanding of the internet link. You do not have to be a network specialist, but you have to be able to set up some port forwarding, or some little things on it. I could help anybody that needs that, but you got to think about that. It's not just plug it in and make it work. There are some configurations you have to do depending on the devices, but it's pretty simple. And once they're done, they don't change. I've had my remote station for almost 10 years, and quite honestly, the way I have it set up, I didn't have to change any of the parameters there. So again, the remote location, my station is 30 miles south of the Kennedy Space Center. As you can see on a map, it's just near a city called Palm Bay. It's in a garage. So I already explained that. Luckily in the garage, he has 110 and 220, which means I was able to connect my amplifier to that. If not, I would have to only operate 110. As I mentioned before, I'm using the TS480 SAT and the Flex radio. Now the Flex, I didn't buy the Flex with the front panel because it's remote. I don't need it. So I just have the blank front panel, and I run the software here locally. I could buy their panel and use it here too, but for me, it's an expense that I don't really need to, because the computer software handles it fine. So the planning stage 2 is location, radios. Planning stage 3, like I explained, using a solid state amplifier. There are some tube amplifiers that are auto tuning. They're very few, they're very expensive. I prefer the solid state. I like this brand. Other hams prefer others. There's no problem. The one that comes from Flex is fine. It does a good job also. It's just that, it's what you want to have, what you want to pay for. This is the one that we took essentially for the amplifier. For the antennas in Florida, I decided that for 75 and 40 meters, I wanted inverted Vs. And I'm using a horse fence antenna. And maybe this is a little bit of technology for those who are not aware of it. What these antennas are, they're horse fences. They're used to stop horses from leaving an enclosed area. Why am I using that? As you could see in the picture, they're wide, and there are actually 4 wires inside of each one of those. So they're dipoles, but because they have more wires, they're wider, which means I got a wider bandwidth. I cover almost entire 40 meters with a dipole, and on 75 meters, I could go from 7,600 to almost to 4 megahertz, and VisWar between 1.75 to 1. So the advantage of that, it's a dipole, so it's going to have the same performance, but it's broader physically, which means I have more bandwidth, and I like that because that means I could move around in my spectrum without having to worry about playing with a tuner. Some of them they're black, some of them are white. The downside is they're very visible. You do not use this to set up a stealthy antenna. The picture on the right, you could see the apex of the 40 meter antenna, which is black essentially, but you could see the inverted V set up there too. So we have set up over the years, we have the 2 inverted Vs, we have an 8-element log periodic, and we have a 5-element 6-meter antenna on top, and then you could see on top of the garage there's a HO loop, which is an omnidirectional 6-meter antenna. that's there too. So, and we're able to play with any one of those through the setup. So that's what we did. We started off with was just an inverted V. Oh, sorry. What's not visible here, because it's on the right side of the garage, is a Gap Titan DX. I started my remote station with a Gap Titan. It's a great antenna that covers 80 through 10 meters. No tuner required, no traps. It does a good job. It's narrow on 75 meters, but it works. It's not very good for domestic local stuff because it's a vertical, but it does. It gave me DX and it got me on the air. It's not as efficient as a log periodic, but it was perfect. So you could have it set up at one vertical, and a radio just with 100 watts, and you'll have a lot of fun essentially because the vertical will give you DX, which is what a lot of hams would like to do. Because if you want to talk locally, you could do it on 2 meters or 70 centimeters. The remote control link, it's a little bit wordy here, but my remote control link, where I live here, I have fiber. I have gigabit per second fiber. I don't need it, but this is what I have in my condo. So I've got a fiber FTTH they call. I'm going over the internet, and in my remote side, I have a cable modem. And I took the basic service from the cable modem. I don't have to pay anything extra. There's a firewall, there's a router. So from the point of view of the connection, that's what it is. Now, I did indicate something in here that, as you know, if you have a cable modem or any other modem from a third-party provider, they could change your IP address anytime. It's dynamic. And if they change it, then you're stuck. You can't connect to your system anymore. So you got a plan. I use a service called DIN DNS, which you pay for it, but it's not very expensive. It's an annual subscription. And what it does is that it does a translation for you, dynamic DNS. So when cable modem company they decide to reboot and split their segment and gives you a different IP address, this system will find it. And then I connect through DIN DNS. I never had an issue. So in the years that I had my setup, I think 4 or 5 times the cable company, which is Spectrum, changed the address. And I never had any issues with it. It automatically found it and it took care of it. And the last little item I wrote there is port forwarding. I will show you on another diagram what I mean by why we need to do the port forwarding, but you'll understand that. For my TS480 SAT, I chose the remote rig interfaces. You could buy these at Ham Radio Outlet or direct from them. There are others that are available. I bought that. One is at the remote site, one is at the local site. And if you want to look at it, basically, it's like a wire. It's like my TS480 control that is here, connected to one side, and on the other side, it's the radio. And all that the box does is that it translates the interface to the other end. And from a radio point of view, it's like it's a long wire. There's no big deal there. But you have to configure those. So you have to configure it with the ports, and there's a lot of little things you got to play it. But once it's set up, I've had these set up for years and never had to replay with them afterwards. So once it's done, it becomes plug and play. I also have a camera that I connected to. When I had the ALS 600, I did not have a software program to monitor it. So I had a camera pointed at the front panel, and I could see the meter and the LEDs. So as I was transmitting, I could see what my power output was, if it was the VisWire. And I could also see if there was a fault, for example, overdriven, the red fault light would come on, so I would know it. So for me, my remote monitoring was a camera pointed at the front panel of the amplifier, which is like if you're sitting in front of it, essentially. But now that we have the Expert, I don't need that because I'm able, on my computer here, I have a software package that connects to the Expert. So I have the equivalent of front panel on my computer screen. So when I run the Flex or when I run the Expert, I don't need that anymore, but that's to give an example. This is another thing. If you have a Flex radio and you don't have immediate access, you got to think about something to be able to update the firmware of the Flex, you cannot do it remotely from your computer. It has to be on the LAN side, the network side, the local side. I bought this, a Nook, which is Next Unit Computing. It's a low-cost, little standalone Windows 10 computer. As you can see, it's not that powerful enough. And it's connected on the LAN side. So what I do is that if I have to do any firmware updates to the Flex, I connect to that. That is connected by USB to the Flex. And I'm able then to actually run the radio if I wanted to. I'll get to that in a few minutes, or manage it. So if I have to do an update, I do it from there, no problems at all. That's a downside of their system. You cannot do the update via what they call SmartLink, which is their software. You got to go on the LAN side. And as my LAN is 2,600 miles away, this is how I do it essentially. It's not expensive, but these are things you got to think about. The other advantage of this is that, believe it or not, I could run their software on this. So if I'm traveling and I don't have my laptop or the software on my tablet, for example, which I have, I could take any computer and just punch in the IP address, enter the passcodes, what I need to do. I connect to this, I turn on the Flex, and I could operate from any computer I have. I travel with a tablet, which I could operate with that essentially. Let's give you an idea. But these are things you got to think about if you want to install. Like, okay, I don't need this for the TS480, but I need this for the Flex. Planning stage 5 is evidently the control of the amplifier. The challenge I had there is to control it, I need to connect it to a USB port, but the software they have does not support that. So what I did, and you guys that are familiar with Raspberry Pi, I bought a small little Raspberry Pi. I configured it as nothing more than a USB interface that I connect to it. And what I do is from here, when I start my amplifier, I simply turn on that connection. And then the software on my computer here connects through the link to the Raspberry Pi that goes to the amplifier. And now I have that control screen you see, I have it on my computer. So again, you've got to plan and say, okay, fine, well, I'm going to use the amplifier. Oh, but how do I remote control it? So you put a little Raspberry Pi and you get it set up. The rotator. Now I want to install a rotator. Well, how do I turn that sucker? I'm here. So I went this path. There are Green Arrow has different type of controllers, and you guys are familiar with them. I went with these because back then Green Arrow did not have what was needed. So because I've been using this for years, it's again the same suppliers of the remote rig. They sell what's called the 1216L and 1216H, and their interfaces. And without going into details, they let you control devices externally. And then the rotator controller is designed to go to a rotator essentially. And the screen you see is what I do here. So this is how we do it. I would have my screen. Okay, I want to point to 80 degrees. I just type in 80 cent, and the needle moves and I'm turning it. So it's the same thing as if you're sitting in front of your computer and I'm simply turning the antenna. And again, when you do that, if you have a remote base like me that's in Florida, my Great Circle map is set to in Florida, not from here, because evidently the coordinates are going to be different. But again, that's me sitting from my desk. Then I'll show you a picture, and I'm able to turn my antenna and do whatever I want. At the bottom, I indicated something. Lightning storms are common, and if you want to be protected, you've got to have isolation devices. I use some devices from Paradigm, and on the next slide, I'll explain to you why I use those. What these are, they're kind of unique. They simply switch out the antenna from your system when you turn the system off, except they don't just disconnect the center, they also disconnect the shield. So what they're doing, and you could see that I think on the left-hand side, a little isolator here. Now, mind you, this is not for direct lightning hits. There's nothing, unless you pay the professional stations we install that I showed you before, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars set up in lightning protection. That's on ham radio stuff. So it won't protect you from a direct lightning hit, but it will protect you from side strikes or surges. So whenever my system is turned off, and I'll explain how I do that, these two devices essentially will disconnect. And I'm going to go back a few slides here. You see isolation 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 and 2 are single antenna ones. 3 and 4 are dual antenna ones. They're all controlled remotely. So when my system is turned on, they're all switched on. When the system is turned off, all of these are turned off. All of the inputs are grounded, and all of the outputs are isolated. So in the years that I've been there, with all the lightning and all the challenge that we have with storms, I have not had a single issue of radios being damaged with that. I did have a lightning strike. I'll explain to that what happened there, but none of the radios were damaged. But again, this is a fail-safe you got to think about. I know that over here we don't think about lightning because it's not a big thing, but depending on how you have it set up, this is a good safety thing to be able to have. That little phono plug here, why they offer that is you could have it set to connect, to turn on whenever you turn your radio on and to turn off whenever you turn your radio off. It's as simple as that. But these are it set up. They're very much worthwhile as an investment. And I think proof is in the pudding. With all the lightning strikes in Florida, I've never had a radio failure because of that, essentially. But I've never had a direct lightning strike. So that's one thing I got to mention. And these things handle up to 1.5 kilowatts. So legal limit for ham radio, we're covered up to 6 meters. So there's no problem running an amplifier through this. The next one is your AC power. This is the key. This WPS I'm using here, some of you are familiar with it, some of you are not. These outlets are all remote controllable, and they're controllable through the Ethernet. The little antenna on the left is if you're local, like my friend Alan in Florida, from his home, he could access it through Wi-Fi to get to it if he wants to manage it. What these are remote control switches, but another advantage of this device is there are script languages. Those that are familiar with it's called the Lula language. It's a scripting language, and the advantage of it is that I could set different programs for each power outlet. One of them that I have as an example here is a script. Okay, what happens if my cable modem locks up? Everybody has that situation sometimes. What you got to do? You got to sometimes go unplug it and replug it. I have a script that pings every 5 minutes Google. If it doesn't reach Google, it says, oh, I don't have a connection anymore. It turns the modem off, it turns the router off. It waits a couple of minutes, turns the modem on, waits a couple of minutes, turns the router around, and pings. And it keeps on doing that cycle until there's a connection. Because of that, I've never had an issue connecting to my system, unless there's a long, cable outage, like for example, after a hurricane. Whenever the system comes back on, everything comes back on automatically. So yes, there are AC power switches you can control on and off. I like this one because I'm able to configure all, and the language that I'm using here, there are many other things you could configure with it, but I could tell it, do this and do that. I could also tell it, monitor the current. The several things I could do with this this idea. On the bottom right-hand side is the screen. When I log on, it's password protected. As you can see, I have isolated antennas, Flex, Raspberry Pi. I have all the different things in here that I could turn on and turn off. In this case here, the Flex is turned off, and I'm showing you, I'm using the TS480 ACT. Now, while I have it set up to make it easy, when I'm finished operating, when I click on the off button for the antennas, I don't have to do anything else. The system will turn off the script will turn off the antennas. We'll then go to the Flex, tell the Flex, shut down. When I'm saying shut down, it doesn't turn the power off, it tells it to shut down. So it does a nice shutdown, so I don't have to damage the flashes inside. Then 30 seconds later, it turns the power off of the Flex. Then it goes to the amplifier. It tells the amplifier shut down. So the amplifier saves the information, and then it turns the power off. And how I do it for the amplifier, these are all 110 outlets. I built a relay box that controls 220. So I have 220 coming in, 220 going out, and I control it through 110, but it'll like a wall wart. So in other words, I give it 12 volts at, I don't know, 50 milliamps. It relay flips, and then I got 220. When I remove that, it turns it off. So that's how I control 220 without to invest money in a very expensive 220 setup, essentially. Now, the importance of these, what I call gracefully shut down, Flex has a tendency that if you just turn the power off and it's in a process of doing a backup, you mess it up. You're going to have to order from Flex a new flash, and you got to put it into it. It's a mess essentially to be able to do it. So they tell you do two things: leave it always on or do it properly. And this is why I say do a graceful shutdown essentially to get that done first. The amplifier, there's a risk also because when you memorize settings into it, and if I just pull the power off, that I don't know where it is in the settings. But if I do graceful shutdown, I'm simply telling it, first of all, okay, amplifier, I'm shutting down, save your information. It takes a couple of seconds, but I play it safe. I waited like 15 seconds before, and then afterwards I remove the power. So what I would see on this little screen on the right-hand side, as the power goes off, where it says on, it turns red. It says off, 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 it'll sequence off. Now, again, I'm showing you this is the setup I have. It's very useful, very flexible. And I like this setup essentially because it gives me flexibility. It's not very expensive. And if we do something with Papa, I'll probably use this. Some of you already are familiar with these, but others are not. This is from Web Power Switch, essentially. They have different models, but this is the one I like the most. It's the simplest one, and it gives you the flexibility. I could program it from the front panel. I could program it from the computer. I could program it remotely. So that's the good thing about it. Stage 7. I wanted to explain, just to give you a little idea of what I meant by port forwarding. If you look at the bottom, I'm coming in through DIN DNS. There's the cable modem. The cable modem is one output. I got a lot of devices here. So how I do it is I connect to a router, and this is just an example of a router I could be using. In a router, I have rules, and in the rules, I'm saying, okay, if you come in on port 377, you're going to go here. Port 378, you go there. 379, you go there, and so on and so forth. So that means on when I did in here, if I go back in here, no, sorry, that's different here, but when I want to connect, for example, connect to the Flex, and I say find, I turn my software on, the software is going to point to the IP address, to the DNS. Then it's going to say, for example, port 1292. Okay, port 1292, the router will give me a connection here. This is how, from home, I could control my rotator, my amplifier, the radio, that I could get into the NUC. I could do all of that through one connection by simply port forwarding. Those that are familiar with ham radio, with networking, it's a simple thing. Those that are not, I could explain and show how it's done. Once it's done, you don't have to do it anymore. But this is the trick to be able to access your multiple items on the other end. And like I mentioned here, reliability-wise, I've not had any issues. I've had power outages. I've had long-term power outages due to hurricanes, tropical storms, and everything has always come up properly. I've had one bad luck. It was, and what was destroyed were my AC devices, power supplies and stuff like that. The radios, nothing was damaged there. The electrician said, and that's what he said, the surge came up from the ground. It was a ground strike, and it came up through the reverse path and destroyed a water pump and destroyed everything. It was 110 based. Oddly enough, the electrician, who's a specialist, said, you shouldn't ground your systems. And I said, oh yeah, sure, no problems. I believe you. And then he left. I ground my systems. Evidently, I understand what he's trying to say, but no, you want to have your systems grounded. The key here is you ground them differently. But why I didn't have any damage to the antennas, my systems were disconnected. So my antennas were all disconnected. Everything was off. So what got hit was essentially the through the power line. So that's the only damage I ever had from lightning, was a ground strike probably 100 feet away, and it damaged water pumps and stuff like that, but nothing else with the system. But again, depending on where you set up, this is the advantage of planning properly has saved me thousands of dollars because I've not had to change radios or do any other work, just because careful planning how you do it up front. Operating, well, once it's all set up, as you can see here, it's fun. You could operate it. There's no problems. I check to make sure there are thunderstorms. I get it on the air and I operate. I got to remember that it's on the East Coast, so it's a different time zone. I got to remember also, there's some advantages of that too, by the way, is that when it's 11 o'clock at night, it's 2 o'clock in the morning there, and DX is fantastic towards the South Pacific. Working from the East Coast is nothing at all compared to the West Coast. DX is always there, even when they say there's no conditions. You've got the Caribbean, South America, Central America, Africa, Europe, the US. It's always there. The most difficult location for me to hit, which is very, very hard, is India. Anything that's transpolar, going up to the North Pole, is very hard to hit what's on the other side. But I could go Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia. I could go on the other side, Africa. I could go to the UAE. I have no problems at all. But going right over the pole towards India, actually a little bit west of that too, is a tough one to do. But I use a log periodic. And for those that are not familiar, even though it says it's an 8-element log periodic, it really is 3 elements per band. It's the way it's done. So I have a lot of fun doing DX from there. I could operate voice and data. So I do operate JS8 call because I like chatting. I do FT8. I do a lot of different modes. Now, I want to mention one thing for those that like to do CW. That's a challenge when you're doing remote because the latency tied to it. The TS480 SAT and the remote rig has a neat little trick where I don't have a problem running CW. When I'm transmitting from here, I'm a CW fan too. So when I transmit from here, I hear my side tone through the remote interface. So I hear it here in live. If I was listening to it as it's being transmitted, I'd go crazy because you've got like a quarter second or a third, 1/8 of a second delay, and your mind would go crazy. So what it does, it generates the tones locally. It converts your Morse code into an IP string. It's sending that string to the other end, to the other remote rig. The remote rig is taking that, converting it back into on off, and then sending it to your radio. That way it's getting around latency issues and is getting you, if you have any jiggle or any issues on your line, essentially, it'll take care of it. So it's not dot 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 dot. It's actually converting into a binary, into a string, Ethernet, sending it out in at the other end. And that's part of the latency you're going to have, because the time it takes to do the conversion, send it to the other end, deconvert it, send it to your radio. If you're listening to it, if you're listening to the radio at the same time, and you could do that, you go nuts, because essentially you're wondering what's going on here and with the sound. But this is one way to do it. With the Flex, it's a different ballgame. It's a lot more elaborate, complicated to do it with Flex. That's why I just use the TS480 SAT for CW. For data, there's no problems whatsoever. I'm almost at the end, guys. So on the left-hand side is my remote setup. At the bottom left-hand side, you see the TS480 SAT. The screen is showing you the Flex radio running at the same time. You see at the bottom on my screen is my remote amplifier control. On the top right-hand side is just a sub-screen to the Flex. So I'm able to run the Flex, and I have no problems at all with latency. Everything's working fine. I have my IC7300 and another Flex 1500 locally here. I have a 30-foot wire thrown out the window here, and I use that with an external tuner to do like a FTA JS8 call, and I could also do beaconing, WSPR. With 5 watts, I'm heard around the world essentially with this system and beaconing. Somebody last night was talking about they enjoy doing that. I just leave it running the Flex and running beacon mode essentially. It's no problem. When I was in Yuma, I have this tablet. I have a Surface Pro 4, and I had a tablet like that, and I was running from the hotel room. I was running my HF station. I also bought this, which is a low cost. I bought it on Amazon. It's designed for volume control, but you know what? Flex recognizes it. I use that, and I'm able to. It's my knob to change channels, because if you use just the tablet, I gotta use my either a mouse or the pad to be able to move and all that. And the bottom, it makes it feel more like ham radio. As you could see here on my picture of my home station, I have one from Flex in the bottom, just to the right of just to the left of the AB antenna switch. That they sell that one, but it's like $150 when they were selling it. This thing here that I'm using is $22. It's small. I put it in my little carrying case when I travel, and I have a lot of fun. And it lets me turn the knob like I'm dialing a regular radio. So it's kind of fun because, it's one thing to have computerized stuff, but it's a lot of fun. Like, that's why on my Flex station at home, I use a knob to change frequencies. It's just something, maybe because I'm an old fart and I've been around for so long that for me, I want a knob sometime, but I'm also open to computer stuff. That's about it for now. I'm going to just mention one thing first. Oh, on the right-hand side, I just posted a picture there because I laughed, but I found it usable. If you look at it carefully, real power, a kilowatt, is your beer. The reflected power, the wasted power, reactive power is on top. Your foam, you don't really need that. The total power is a kVA, the whole package, essentially. I was just looking at it, I said, it's a nice little example to show what is your kilowatt power anyhow. So that's that. I'm doing a little bit of shopping here at the same time. If there's a ham in the San Diego area that is interested in letting me set up a remote station here for my own personal use, maybe I'll work with Papa System on that too, because I have radio, I have an amplifier. As a matter of fact, let me talk to you, Carl. Sorry, Cecil, because I have a setup for remote complete. So we could talk another point regarding that, but I have it here. And I don't have it set up yet, naturally. I was going to set it up somewhere, but that person had a bout with COVID and other issues, health issues afterwards. So I was not able to get it set up. And the last item in here is important also. My station in Florida, everything is insured through the ARRL insurance. And it's I have friends that have had direct hits and their radios were destroyed, and the insurance is fantastic. So anybody that wants to set up a remote station, I highly recommend going down that path. I'm not, I'm getting money off that, but it's really worthwhile because I know that those that had issues, it was no questions asked. I had to claim once from them. It was after a hurricane, my Gap Titan DX bent. I didn't put a guy wire in the middle, the guy wire, so it bent. I sent the pictures, and within 2 weeks, I got a full reimbursement for the antennas. So they had no questions asked. They're fantastic. It's really worthwhile. I didn't talk about that with lightning strikes before because it wasn't a lightning strike. It was a wind. It just too strong wind, and it bent right in the middle, essentially. The fun of living in Florida. I'll leave it now to David, how he wants to do it, essentially. But I hope I didn't bore anybody to that. But this is just one example. There are many other ways to do it. I wanted to share. The main thing is the thought process before setting up a remote ham. And I kind of shared this with Cecil only also, saying that you don't just plug it in. We got to think through what we want to have. But I did a lot of it already, so it's helpful. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, okay, great. Just unshare your screen.
Okay, 1 second. Go here. Done.
Yeah, great. I know there's a lot of going to be a few questions here. So let me switch to gallery view. Okay, I think Ron had his hand up first.
Sorry, it was locked. Yeah, my question is really simple. At the beginning of the presentation, you showed a loop antenna, but I couldn't quite scale it. What is roughly the diameter of that thing?
3 feet.
Thank you.
It's the loop. It's the one from MFJ, essentially. They have two of them. It's about 3 feet. The smaller one is just wire. If you're going POTA or stuff like that, you would carry it. But this is a base station one, essentially. I bought those before you even had the other ones around, essentially. I was using it at my house in Florida.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Bruno, if you had to give a list of essential equipment to start out a small remote station, what would be on the list to start, just a small list of like a router, which radio. So you're using Flex and the Kenwood. A lot of us have access to used Kenwood gear. So what would you recommend as far as just the essentials?
Well, the first thing is evidently your radio, and again, it also depends what you want to do. If you want to have a real control head sitting on your desk, in other words, you want to operate it as a radio. Some people don't like running off computers. Then the TS480 SAT, there's the 7100, the older radio, the ICOM IC7100. They're plug and play with the remote rig interface. You could actually have your control head on your desk, and you could operate the radio anywhere else through interface devices. So there's that. But my 7300 could be remote control also, but that's only through their software package. So I think the first thing is, what do you want to have as a radio? Look at what's available out there for remote control. Most of the new radios now have IP interfaces. Well, if you have an IP interface, you don't need other things. You don't need remote interfaces like I have. If you're using an older radio like a TS2000 from Kenwood, you need to have boxes like the remote rig interface to be able to do it. So bottom line is, look at the radio you want. How does it get connected? Is there a software package to run it? Then you got to have at your remote site, you got to have a modem, whatever, not either cable modem or fiber modem, or whatever you have essentially at the other site. You have to have, I said the router, you have the modem, evidently your antennas, and the antennas you choose is what bands you want to operate and the space you want to have. Then you want to have a way to remotely power it. You want to be able to control it because, follow FCC rules and all that. So like a remote power switch. And then you want to have protection. What I didn't mention in my diagram, I do have a UPS on the Nook there. So I do have UPSs set up. They're not designed to power the whole system, but it's just to make sure that, for example, if I want to make sure I do a power down gracefully, I would have a UPS tied to it. But so to summarize now, the radio, the software, or how you want to operate it, the antenna, the AC power control, the modem, the router. What I could do is I'll post something on the Papa site essentially, which just gives you the basic stuff. What do you need to do to get it up? And again, you saw my setup. I have a lot more stuff because evidently, if you wanted to put up a beam, you need more stuff to be able to do it essentially. But I started off with the rate. I didn't even have an amplifier. I had the TS480, the remote rig interface, the cable modem, and the router, and the gap tightened DX antenna. That was my setup. Very simple. 100 watts. I had a lot of fun with DX. I bought at Hamfest, I bought an amplifier at a solid state, installed that, built what I needed for 220. That's fine. And then I added on to it more intelligent stuff. And like any ham station, it just grows without you. It miraculously grows to different sizes. You don't even know how you got there at one point. So
Yeah, very good. Well, the newer radios, I can think of ICOM, Yaesu, and Kenwood, all have LAN connectors in them, like the Kenwood 890S, which I have, or the ICOM 7610 or the 7300,
yep.
or the Yaesu 101 series. They all have LAN connectors. So any of those radios, the FTDX10 even, Yaesu, any of those can be
That one
remote.
you need a box, I believe, right?
Well, you can get two radios. That's the other option.
Okay, yeah,
Right?
you're right.
So, you don't need to, you can just buy two radios if they don't have the remote head. So like the Kenwood 890S is a fantastic radio. I dearly love that thing. So I would just get an additional one instead of, it's an additional expense. If they have a remote head, that's great. But if not, you just get another radio.
Yeah,
That'll
no,
work
but
great.
I thought that the FTDX10, I think that it does not, the Ethernet connection, I believe you have to buy a separate box to be able to connect to it. It's a little bit different than the others.
Yeah, there's no
I have a
wonder.
friend that has a 890 and I was asking him if that was a good remotable radio. He did not recommend it to him. I'm going to ask him why he says that. It has an IP interface, but I think it has to do with the capabilities. But again, when you're remoting it, you're using their software. You're using the Kenwood software. Like when I remote my 7300, I'm using their RSVA1 software. So I'm using that. So your screen is going to be whatever it is. It's fine. There's no problems at all. So you could do it. That's why I said before, make sure you have software that's available to be able to do it, evidently. Cecil, I think you had a question before, Cecil?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of background homework based on our intended use for the pop-up members. And one of the issues I thought I'd get a workaround with Ray Novak from ICOM, but we cannot probably use the 7300 because every user has to buy their license, and he wouldn't budge from that one iota, which surprised the hell out of me. He said Japan controls that. So the 7300, which I thought was going to be a winner, we can't use. So I guess my question is, how do we control and invite people to use or pop-up members to use it without, and we're not going to use the icon? Is the software you're using, do we have some control there?
Well, evidently my ICOM, I'm using their software, so I licensed it. The Flex, you got to license it too. They don't, unless you make a deal with them, which I doubt they will. You got to license their SmartLink software to be able to do it. But I know I don't have it on the tip of my tongue here, but I believe that there's some open source software packages that work. HRD, for example, works, but you got to license that too, unless you take a. I'm going to have a look. I believe HRD has a free version, the older versions they have, but you got to have a software package. And I have HRD. I pay for it. I believe there's an open source one that's available. I'm going to have a look at that. I took note of that as to look for that. But you're right. If you're running it through software, you're going to have something to access it. This is why when you go to, for example, the pay for use packages like remote ham radio, it's all web-based, but they spent a lot of money to create their own interface, and they have it there. And when they connect to a Flex, believe me, they're paying a license for every one of those connections. They have it set, but you're calling in, so you're not requiring the user to have the license. It's the site that has a license to be able to do it. I'll have a look at that, but it is a valid point. In other words, if you want others to connect to it, there are various software packages. HRD, for example, controls all sorts of radios, but it's a licensable package. So I agree with what you're saying. And do you want them to have to buy a license to get into it? So
yeah, that'll be a big question that was kind of unknown to me. I figured I've had such good relationships with ICOM that they, especially the way I approached ICOM, is that we were trying to encourage more more technicians to move towards getting an upgrade, which would be more sales for ICOM on their products. But he said he has absolutely zero control on that part of the licensing. So I wonder if I might have shot myself in the foot with the idea that we would be able to provide this. I guess the option would be to approach some members if they want to, they can buy. I didn't ask them what kind of a discount we could get on it for membership use, but I'm pretty sure it's right around $100 for
Yeah.
the licensing. So that might be another option. It's not that, well, $100 is $100, especially with inflation right now. But we will have to do more, stay more focused on that, and maybe I'll approach them again and see if we could at least get a dealer discount on it. And I wonder if once it's licensed to a call sign. Do you know?
Yes, it is.
I wonder if we could license it to that would be an interesting approach. If he would allow us to, he won't do it for a club call.
I think the challenge there is that if you have 10 people using it, then they'll have to have on 10 computers. So I don't know. But
Well,
remember, once it's done, you could access any one of any ICOM radio that has in the network. But I agree with you. It's worthwhile asking.
Cecil,
Yeah, go ahead.
this is Mark, K6FG. They're $150.
Is that a lifetime licensing fee, or is that per year? And if it is a lifetime licensing fee, a typical HF setup, you're looking at $1,000. So $100 is a great, investment to get into the hobby there, in my opinion.
It's a one-time payment of $150. I've been using it for probably about 8 or 10 years, and it works flawlessly.
Yeah, the only time they ask you if they upgrade versions, you could pay for it, but then you look at is it worthwhile? You probably did the same thing too. You looked at it and said, hey, mine works fine. I don't need to. RSBA 1, RSBA 2, they do the same thing, so I don't really have to worry about it. Yeah.
Well, hey, Bruno, we're having a hands-on. Hopefully we'll have enough attending at the San Diego luncheon. That might be, might be a good question just to ask folks here that are, we got about 50 or 60 people. How many would invest $100 if we went the ICOM route? Can you set that up? This is a good question to ask. Would they, if the Papa system sets up a remote, would they invest $150?
For sure.
I could do that. Somebody else was going to mention something?
You got a bunch of people waiting.
Give it to David. David, take it and ask the question. Can you set it up?
Yeah, I'm trying to create the poll. So, yeah, there was a couple people that had some questions, like David Hall, and let's see who else. There's several of them here.
Carey, I believe you had a question too.
Let's go with the questions, and then we'll set up a poll, and maybe we'll generate something through the whole system, not just the people that are here. So KC6N, question.
Okay, I see I didn't put my call sign on this thing like I suggested, but yeah, so I have two questions. First one is simple, well, they're both simple. Which tool are you using for that presentation? I've never seen it before. I was just kind of curious. It looks like Photoshop or something, but it's definitely not PowerPoint.
Okay, here's what I created my drawings in Visio. I then imported it into PowerPoint, and then I printed to PDF. Because the PowerPoint is a large file because of all the images, and I just converted it to PDF. What I presented on screen is a PDF file, but it was Visio. Then I put I format the images, I pop it into PowerPoint, I convert to video. I do this on a regular basis because Visio, you're familiar with Visio, right?
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with all of that, but that didn't look like that to me. So
that's what it was.
Curious, I'm just curious what. Okay, so the next question I have, would you be willing to share with us some rough estimate of how much money you've got tied up into all of that. It looks like a boatload of money to me. And those bigger stations that you have, I mean, that looks like multiple tens of thousands of dollars. Not in the no, I'm talking about the ones
Oh,
that you
that.
showed with the multiple antennas. Those things look super
Oh, yeah.
serious.
I could mention that if I'm going to talk about on the professional side, each one of those amplifiers, you're talking about like 200K. All right, so that little shelter had about 800K of amplifiers, plus think about the air conditioning, all of the civil engineering has to be done below that, the power. Evidently, you're talking about these conduits going up to the antennas. Those antennas are close to 100 grand each. So there's a lot of stuff tied into that. That's on the, but your question, that's on the professional side. On the amateur radio side, a lot of the stuff is bought secondhand. The amplifier, the flex, I bought it secondhand because the wait time was too long from flex. I started off with very simple, a radio and a few things. Total value now, probably new, is you're probably talking about 10 grand or more, but I didn't pay that. It was all, we built it, we put it together, put it up there. But on the professional side, oh no, that's a totally different ballgame. That big antenna, the big spire cone, I could imagine going to an HOA and say, hey guys, I want to install this in my yard here. So
yeah, okay, yeah. Well, I don't feel bad about all my brand new Motorola stuff now.
Perfect. No. Again, the advantage, this is the fun thing. And the reason why I'm not retired is because I love what I'm doing. What I learned in amateur radio, I apply on that side. And what I learned on that side, I apply in amateur radio. But what I do is I minimize, I transform the cost. I can't use a $20,000 remote, so I use a $700 one. So it's kind of fun because for me, if I was an accountant, I probably would have retired, made more money. But I love what I'm doing, so they both complement each other, and there's a lot of challenges.
What company is it that you're working for? Just out of curiosity.
Datron World Communications.
Oh, I know those guys. I think they have either an office or a plant up in Carlsbad, right next to Max Linear, where I used to work.
Yeah, it's in Vista, and that's where I work essentially. I worked for 8 years in the Florida office. Then they moved me back here. But I'm working here, which is the factory in Vista, and I essentially run the systems. Before COVID, I travel around the world.
It's funny. I think I talked to you on HF. I think we've had this discussion before. So I'll turn it loose to whoever else has got their hand up. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. We'll go to Lark.
Yeah, I was wondering about this licensing. I purchased a lot of the ICOM licenses for remote sites as well. And so would it be practical to install at the remote site, a PC of some flavor and the ICOM or whatever software of some flavor, and then just use remote desktop or, RDP into it, since that's integrated into everybody's Windows or some version of that? Can that work?
Yes. That's a very good way of doing it. If you just look at my presentation, when I said I had the Nook, that little computer on the LAN side, anybody could access that, and there's a license. My license to operate is on that Nook, so I don't need to have the software installed in my computer. So if you install a computer that's powerful enough and have the licensing there, that would do it. You'd have to have a good connection, but that would work. So I think for CISO, that's something worthwhile looking into, installing a computer there and connect to it. Thanks. From my point of view, that's a very good idea.
Yeah. So the way to do it is to click the button with the hand up. Go to down below where it says something. So you can
go to reactions.
Yeah, there you go.
And then click raise your hand.
Yeah. So
and then don't forget to unraise your hand after you're done.
Yeah. So we'll go just in order here. People that have done that already. So Kim, KC6ARY, nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, David, and everybody else. I love these Zoom meetings because I get to put some faces to the call signs and of course our in-person meetings too. Real quickly, I'd love to get Bruno's thoughts on having a remote station that's not in a house, I had thought of getting like a job box that you'd see like on a construction site or a small shack and putting it out on somebody's land where there was some power. And I'm sure there's a lot of gotchas to go with that. So I'll listen for Bruno's comment.
Yeah, in other words, like a kind of a go box system that you install somewhere. Yeah, that's essentially what I'm planning to have here too. You could do it very easily. You just need to have the power, the Ethernet connection. That's the key thing, the link to get back. If it's Wi-Fi, I would not use a phone system because it's very unreliable from the point of view of very high speed and then latency, all sorts of issues depending on usage. But if you have an internet connection, it won't be a problem. To give you one example, when I first moved here, I was in a townhouse I was renting, and I had my station and the yard outside and a small little shelter, and I had everything in there. I had power 110, but no amplifier. But I was Wi-Fiing into my home upstairs. So I was connecting from upstairs to there, and I was controlling the radio because I have a second TS480. So the control head was my desk, and the radio was outside. But I didn't have to worry about coax cable. I didn't have to worry about Cat5 cable. I simply Wi-Fi to it. But what you're talking about is a small little rack, whatever, radio, what you need inside, put it at a friend's place, set up your antenna, have power, internet connection. You just got to make sure you configure to get into it, and you're in business. And if you have the right setup and you use services like DNS, then it doesn't really care about what IPS address it is, it'll find it automatically. But yeah, that's definitely doable. And you just got to find a person that's ready to let you use the site or use it yourself.
Yeah, I'm thinking about setting up a remote station at my house so that if I travel, I can remote back to it.
Exactly.
That's an easy thing to do to start up, just to get used to doing the remote thing. So that's what my project for this year is going to do that. Jeff, AB6MB, nice to see you.
Thanks, David, for running this, and my compliments, Bruno, on your setup. My inner geek really likes it.
Hey, do it over time. That's what I could say.
Yes, but real quick, I want to thank Kim Carey, KC6ARY. He's been helping me on the antenna net, and really has been a big help to me, and I'd like to thank him for that publicly. And Bruno, I talked to you about that briefly too, so I need to give you a call about that again.
Yeah.
In regards to the remote setup for Papa, I use the remote system called remotehams.com.
Yep.
And they have their own software. And I know I've seen 7300s out there that people are remotely controlling. And so that's something for, and also clubs do use their software because they can assign access or take it away very easily using that remote. So that's something CISO we can look at is remotehams.com. That might be a big option for us. And
yeah, there's a few others out there too that are doing it. Some of them are, I think some of them are even free. So there are different ones. As you said, just finding out what they're doing, how they're using it, and getting. Because remote ham radio, it's the Grand Papa system. Is not Papa, the big tier one, the one essentially. They have it. It's very elaborate. Like I said, I tried it, but I wasn't ready to pay the 69 cents per minute. It's it kind of adds up if you're spending a day doing DXing or contests or something. So
yeah, I used the pay to play system for about a year, and I definitely paid to play. Okay, but Bruno, I don't have any more questions and comments. Just thank you for doing the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Hugo, KM6DQU.
Hello. So my question is, and sorry if this is something you answered in your presentation because I walked away a few times. I'm curious, what if we set this up for the club and multiple people are logged in at the same time and want to use the radio? How does that work? And do you have to have multiple radios if you want to have multiple operators at one time?
Yes, essentially, that's what it is. It's one operator per radio. Even remote ham radio, the pay-per-use site, the reason why you could have multiple people is they have multiple radios around the country, essentially. So it is typically one. So if you're using the station, the remote for Papa system, and you're using it, somebody else cannot come on and control it too, because it's like a software RSA, the software from ICOM. It's one user to the radio at the same time. So yeah, if we expand and put 5 radios, then you'll have 5 users, but then also 5 antennas and 5 everything else.
All right. And then, so if it's just one user, can other users at least listen in remotely?
Good question. I believe that's doable, not through the software, but it could be doable. I don't have an answer to that one, because I've never really looked at that capability of having that done. I know that those that are doing it now online, you do have SDR receivers now. As you know, you could connect to radios anywhere across the country, around the world, to listen. I often do that to listen to my signal to see, well, am I being heard in Europe? So I would turn on the SDR receiver in Europe, listen. If I hear my signal, how it's coming in, essentially. So and those sites let you have multiple users listening. So I'm going to say that it's possible. It's just something I haven't looked into, but it's done now. You could do it now through free SDR access to repeaters. And I've been in some that they had like 10 users at the same time, and they're all controlling the radio. And those guys don't have 10 radios. So I don't see why it couldn't be done, but I can't tell you how it would be done with the Flex. That I don't think is doable. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Mark, KF6FG.
I got a question about the 7300. If you're going to put it up on a mountaintop, I'm wondering if it's immune from being blitzed, as is often experienced during field day, because their front end, I understand, is quite vulnerable.
Definitely.
Any experience with the 7300 up on a mountaintop where there's a lot of RF?
No, I've not had experience with that, but I've not had any issues with mine. And the only problem I had, the closest I've had with RF is on a field day. Bringing that, I was in Florida, brought my radio out, set it up, and I had no problem, no damage, except, as we all know, the 7300 is a pretty bad front end. So as the others were transmitting, I was getting wiped out with noise, but I didn't have anything damaged. But you said on top of a mountain, let me put it this way. I don't think let me turn this around. I do not recommend that you install a remote HF station where there's a lot of other stations. For example, if you're up on a mountain and you got towers and all the microwave and everything else, you don't want to put it there for 2 reasons. Number one, you don't want to create interference to them. And number two, because you're flexible, you're moving around in frequencies. You don't want to create interference. And on the other side, you don't want them to create interference to you. So you don't want to be there. When those high power HF stations I showed you before, the receivers is the key. They're miles away from everybody in the quiet area. You don't want that. So that's what we call split site operation. But what you're talking about on top of a mountain, if there's no other station there too, I don't think you'll have any problem. If there are other stations like transmit towers or whatever, I would not set it up there. We would not like it on HF. The reason why I'm saying that, we tried that here on San Marcos Mountain many years ago. This is professionally setting up an HF station there, linked to our station in Vista, because we have FCC experimental licenses. And it was totally unusable because of all of the RF noise up there, essentially. So, but again, if you were referring to just by itself on top of a mountain, I'd be more concerned about lightning and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So to what he's saying is, don't put it up with a bunch of repeater sites and other transmitters. But if you're on a lone mountain somewhere, it's not a problem.
No, just be careful of lightning. That's the key thing. You are high up. You're the highest spot.
Okay. All right. So the thing that two of my questions were answered, but then we have to. I want to talk about the third thing. So one user per radio. So if we had this remote radio and somebody wanted to sit down for an evening of DXing for an hour or two, that would then lock out anybody else from using that. So we kind of get into the thing of having to limit people, like on some repeater systems that are huge, that, they don't want people rag chewing, tying up an entire system. So how do you regulate that as the conditions get better, where more and more people will want to use this remote system? And then the other thing that was answered was having multiple radios. You can't have, my understanding, you can't have multiple radios at one site. Otherwise, you get a lot of intermod from all the other radios. And I don't know if installing $5,000 radios is the answer, that have really tight receivers where you may not get that intermod. I mean, these are all questions that I don't know, and maybe can be addressed. I think the idea of a remote system is great, but I was under the impression that there could be multiple users, all at the same time, but apparently not. So,
But there is one thing, and you're right, you can't have it at the same time, but there are many clubs now that have this set up. So one of the things I took note here before is to reach out to some of those clubs and see one of the things you brought up, how are they managing it? How are they managing the remote access? How are their users coming on board? What challenges they had? And I'm gonna try to find out more and asking them how they're doing it, because some of them have been using this for a year or more now, and they probably had exactly the same questions you just had.
yeah, because I mean, multiple radios, fine. It'd be great if the Papa system could have 5 or 6 different remote stations, and we could pick up 5 or 6, go into anyone that's not being used. But I'm thinking that's not very practical.
Right.
So, okay, sorry. So it's the usage address that'll be interesting going forward, with it.
Yeah, to be determined.
Yeah.
To be determined. Yeah.
Mark still has his hand up. Did you have another question?
I want to mention a couple things that might be helpful. First of all, on the 7300, I live not far from KFI, and I don't have much of a problem at all. I was concerned, but it's been pretty impressive. So I know some have experienced it. I would not be overly alarmed. I think it's an excellent choice. Number 2, the ICOM 7300 does not have a LAN connection on it.
Right.
So you have to have a PC anyway, even if you were to do ICOM software. So the remote desktop software, might be, low overhead. But the topic that I wanted to mention was single station, single user. Well, if you have an oversubscription, that's the best problem you can possibly have, because I gather the philosophy of this is to intrigue and introduce technician operators, perhaps to promote. So that's a good thing. Great problem. Second thing is, I would recommend looking into socializing a place on the Papa website, so that if you, for example, wanted to reserve an hour, you could do that and it would show it on the website. Or if you were operating, the conditions of operating should be encouraging you to actually be operating, not just listening. You can do that on KFS. You can do that on Utah. You can do that all over the world. But what might be a lot of fun, and again, just a suggestion, that if you got this up and running, is that encourage whoever is on to put their frequency on, and this could pop out on the website. And so others could listen to KFS and say, I want to hear this kid or this old kid, doing their thing on the Papa thing, remote, and they can listen on KFS because they know that you're on, 7230 or whatever, because that pops up on the Papa website. So there's really a lot of cool ideas to socialize this to get the desired effect.
Yeah, great comments there, Lark. I will mention one thing, that in the current QST that just was delivered, I was reading through, and there's been a recent problem, if you call it that, the official observers are noting that there's quite a few technician licenses operating out of band. And so consequently, you know, they're getting on FT8 and other digital modes and without really being aware of their license privileges. So they're getting little nasty grams from the official observers. So I think it's a great idea to have our remote station, but you know, a technician license cannot operate out of band. They must operate within their privileges. There's quite a few. So, you know, as a technician, you can operate on 10 meters sideband from 28,500 up, I believe. And you can operate CW on 40 meters, which is a fantastic opportunity, I believe. So there's, you know, and then there's a huge incentive to upgrade your license, which is honestly really not that difficult. Bob, go ahead, KJ6UVT. Oh, hold on a second. Cecil had a question. He had his hand up. Cecil, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the ideas that we had in order to encourage technicians to upgrade was that we'd have an actual HF net schedule on Sunday, and we would have signups for it, and we would have a net controller operating the system, but invite technicians as to come in and operate under the net controller's license. And this is all why it's so important to do things like we're doing today, Dave, because there's a lot of great ideas that we could really put together, like Lark is saying, a package that's going to accomplish a lot in amateur radio for just taking the ideas that just were discussed today. We could build one hell of a HF program, and we don't have to rush into it. You know, I will comment on it that Bob Hatfield had an HF station up at Palomar Mountain, which is a residential. I was actually thinking of taking an HF station up there and checking to see what the noise level is. That might be a starting point that we could probably use that site because we have space available. It might be noisy like Bruno's saying, but till you get up there and connect an antenna to an HF station and put it at the site, there's very little activity in it. I think there's one or two other repeaters up there in the UHF area, so it might be quiet enough. And we could put a multi-band antenna up there that would cover 10 through 80 and be a great starting point and be relatively close. It's about an hour drive for me from my house here. But anyway, I'll give it back to you, Dave.
Yeah, something like the DX Titan that Bruno was mentioning earlier. You know, it's a non-trapped vertical antenna. They work quite well. Not particularly hugely broadbanded, but you know, will be good match on all those bands. Something like that would work just perfect. And as long as you're away from all the big transmitters up there on the top of the mountain, you're going to do just fine. I don't think it'll be that much noise. Probably maybe less noise there than down in the city. Bob, nice to see you. KJ6UVT.
Yeah, just a quick question. Because it's one operator at a time, I'm just thinking about, it's possible when an operator doing the remote control, can he or she invite his friend or younger generation, whatever, to view what he or she is doing? So that will encourage new ham technician, younger generation know what HF is look like, and maybe in the near future they become a ham or they join to the remote HF this thing. This is brand new for me too. I never think about using remote. I just either using at the mobile or at home. So that's my question. Is that possible to do that? And back to David.
Well, certainly if you invite them to your shack, they can operate under your auspices as the control op. So as long as you're in direct control of the station, you can have somebody there operating that's not even licensed, because you're the control person, and so you can invite that kind of operation, and that would work with the remote as well. So if you have a remote access and you invite somebody over with you in control and under your license privileges, that would work just fine. And I'll just make this kind of statement out for any of the technicians here, and I'll probably do this more publicly later, but I've got a fairly decent HF station with multiple antennas, a Yagi that turns and all that kind of stuff, and multiple radios. So I may invite some technicians over if they would like to operate in an HF station, just to see what it's like. That's how I got into radio. My neighbor had a huge antenna, a 100-foot tower, and I said, "What's that?" So I went over there, and we were in the same industry, and so we became friends. And I immediately said, "Well, this is something I'm going to do." So then I got licensed right away, and it was such a great experience having a mentor like that. So there's nothing like having somebody show you what you're capable of doing to really excite some real interest. So I think it's a fantastic thing to introduce younger people into amateur radios, to actually show them how to operate on an HF station, not just a handy talkie. I don't think that's a great interest for young people that have cell phones and all the other texting stuff. But if they see an HF station, you're talking worldwide, and then all of a sudden, the light bulb goes on. RJ, you had another question.
Unmute. Well, thinking about this, that possibly, I know people hate this idea, but have to resort to some kind of a pay-to-play with the PAPA system. In other words, maybe an additional amount on the membership, whatever that amount is to be determined. To be able to access the system, this would help pay for the system and possibly expand on to get additional systems so more users can use it at one time. And maybe it could be a password type system. And this will also allow addressing the issue that you had, David, about technicians using the radio, that when people sign up and pay that additional amount, their license could be checked and it could be verified that they have a general or above to be able to use the radio. And this way, it would be one at a time. Somebody would have to sign up and reserve and use their password to reserve a time slot to use the radio. I don't know if I know people don't like the money aspect of it, but this could be a way to address the issue that you had, Dave, about making sure that properly licensed people use it.
Yeah, I don't think it would be a great issue here within the PAPA system, because that'll be checked pretty closely. The idea of membership tiers has come up, and we'll address that as the time goes forward. But currently, we're not entertaining that kind of an idea. But other systems do that. They have tiers of membership. So something to think about in the future if this really takes off, and we're able to expand our HF capabilities remote. That could be a possibility in the future. But it is an idea that I've thought about. Let's see. TC, K7XCB.
Hey, David. Good to
Hey,
talk to you.
how are you? Nice to see you.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing you.
Hey, I got a question. So, AB6MB, Jeff pointed me over to that ham radio online stuff. And I was just wondering, it seems like they have a system we could use. I'm wondering about partnering with them to test this system, especially if they have some unused bandwidth. They have application, it looks like they have the software and they have the repeaters lined up. Perhaps some sort of annual, it looks like their annual fee is $99. I know it wouldn't get us our own system, but I'm just throwing it out there that maybe instead of reinventing the wheel, we could network with them somehow.
Careful.
Yeah, yeah. My initial feeling is, you know what, we're doing our own thing.
That's what I figured.
That's part of the fun of it, right? Creating and experimenting and doing all those kinds of things, right? That's amateur radio. So, you know, it's not reinventing the wheel, it's just doing it ourselves. It's one thing to buy a radio, it's another thing to build a kit or build a radio, right? So we're building here, and that's part of the fun. Bruno, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to mention, when you mentioned the $99 per year, look carefully. That's the subscription. Then you got to pay per use. In other words, you look at a different antennas and different stations, they charge you 39 cents per minute or 69 cents per minute, or depending where you're going to. So it's the $99 per year is not bad. It's when you, if it's the same system I'm talking about, or remote ham radio, it's the recurring charge where it gets crazy.
Exactly. Hi, Fred. How are you?
Yes.
Well, we're doing good.
Okay.
Bruno, great presentation. I love it. I've played a little bit with the remote radio stuff. I have an HF station at my cabin. I only do FT8. From that, I use a FT2000 and a computer. So it's really simple. I use remote PC to get into the computer. And for just doing FT8, it's very simple. I mean, you have the software for the FT8. There's no problems with delays or anything. I can't tell you exactly how many contacts I've made from there, but well over 2,000. Right now, the antenna's down. It came down in the wind in December, and I got to get back up, get the antenna going. But it's just a kick in the butt to play with the HF radio. I've had a remote rig set up there, actually 2 of them. I use one is on a V71 that I set up originally. And unfortunately, I let a friend in North Carolina use it. I give him a control head and he kind of took it over and I never could use it anymore. So I added a FT8900 and another remote rig setup. Absolutely work great. They've both been up there for 2 or 3 years. I mean, playing remote radio is just really fun and it isn't that expensive. Like I say, if you just want to do FT8, it's basically a radio, a computer, sign up, like I say, for like remote PC. That was cheap. I think I paid a little over $100 for 2 years for it. And you can have like 8 computers on the system or 10. But, oh, and Bruno, the other thing, I use for controlling things, I use a Z-Wave setup. But I love your thing with that web power switch. I'm definitely going to look into that. That looks like just the absolute perfect thing. I also use the Paradigm setup. I have that when the 12-volt power supply goes on, it brings that online, ungrounds the antenna, power goes off, it grounds the antenna again. And again, like you, I've not had any problems. I've had lightning hits a little ways away, but no problems. And I think that covers about everything. Great presentation, though. I love it. So back to net control there.
Yeah. Thank you, Fred. Any other questions? Well, any final comments there, Bruno?
Nope, I think it was very interesting. And as Fred just mentioned, it doesn't need to cost a lot. It could be very simple if you want to just do FT8. So I understand his systems. My system grew over time, but like I said, I started out with very basic and it didn't cost a lot used. But all that we talked about setting up a station for the club, we really have to think through it. And you mentioned that many times too, Dave. We have a plan before you start doing it. We talked about the last thing about the licensing. It's not just the techs coming onto general. You also have the issue of generals going into the extra class portion. So there's that also. So there's a lot of little things to look at. And part of it's going to be your own responsibility. But remember that the older of the license is going to be getting the pink slips from the FCC. So the call sign is going to have to be the call sign. That's going to be interesting too. The call sign of the club, if that's what
it would be the call sign of the individual.
Of the individual going to use. Okay, that's different. Right.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the club call.
Okay, I thought maybe because I was going to say that's the risk. There's a risk there
No,
too.
no. If you're in control of the station, it's your thing. You know, there's a lot of club stations around. Now, depending, you can use the club call during contesting and things like that. But for our application, it would really have to be their own call sign.
Got it.
Otherwise, you know, we'd be open for all kinds of
You got it.
issues, right?
Yeah. That's it. I don't.
All right. So what I'll do is I'll stop the recording. I really appreciate all you guys showing up. It's, you know, there's been some chat about, oh, by the way, 70% of you said that were here said that you would be willing to buy the ICOM license for your radio to do this. 30% said no. That's a pretty good, you know, percentage, 70%. So I certainly would do it. I have a 7610, that would work. So what I'll do is I'll turn the recording off, and then you guys can stick around and talk, or you can unmute yourselves and whatever you guys want to do. And I won't close the session down until.
I had another
later.
question.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Hugo, go ahead.
So it's been a while since I read the process, and I'm sure there is a process when you're calling CQ. Let's say the repeater, I mean, the radio's in Florida. How do you identify yourself? If there's a way to put out their CQ call sign and identify that you're remote in Florida, and then also on logging, how does one log a contact of a remote station that's in Florida and the person on the radio is in California? Just curious.
Yeah, this brings up a bunch of issues. I'll let Bruno finish, but here's my chance to get on the soapbox about call signs. One of the huge problems in my book, for my world, is people getting call signs that are out of the area. So, for instance, getting a 3 call because it's your initials or some crazy thing like that. I'm really against it, and that's because of my experience on HF going back decades. So when a DX station calls, you know, for North America, and then because it's such a huge pileup, and they want to say, okay, 6s only, that means West Coast. It doesn't mean somebody in New York with a 6 call. And so everybody getting call signs out of the area creates a huge problem. Nobody knows where anybody is anymore, and this is a real issue when it comes to DXing. So what you need to do when you are operating remote is to use your proper grid square, and you can also use a /4 or whatever you want to do there. But mainly, if you're operating FT8, especially, you need to use the proper grid square. Or if you're operating portable, you know, change the grid square for your logging. And that way, if somebody's chasing grids, they're going to have the correct information. Anyway, Bruno, finish up what I'm started to stir there.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I have a Canadian license V2EQ, and if I move to a different province in Canada, I got to change licenses. It's not portable. Here we change it in the States. What can I say? There's a reason why I have W4AFK. When I was in California, I had W6AFK. I moved to Florida. I didn't think I was going to be coming back, so I got a 4 call. The 6 is used by somebody in San Francisco now, so I can't get it back. But then I said to myself, I don't have a problem. I'm operating remote through Florida. I'm using W4. So when I'm on the air, it's W4. If they go to my QRZ page on the first, I indicate if I'm from California, this is the grid square. This is the important thing to FT8. The grid square is important. But I did not go and ask for a W6 call or here because I'm operating remote. If I don't have a remote station in Florida anymore, I might just go and change here. But that's personal preference now because it's no longer a rule. And what you mentioned, David, I think it's too late. You know, it's anybody gets anything from anywhere. There's still some limitations. You can't get something from Alaska or Hawaii, but nevertheless, you know, I've got stations that from the Virgin Islands that moved to the States. but they're operating with KP2 calls. So people think they're in the Virgin Islands, but they're not. They're now in New York. It just happened to kept the call sign. How I do it when I call DX, CQDX, I'm just calling from there, and then I say where I'm from. When I operate from here, like when I'm doing FT8 from my home on my low power system wire, it's the grid square. So they know right away that I'm in DM13IE, so they know exactly. Or EL97QX or DM13ID. I simply use the grid square. I even mentioned that on my website that if I'm doing FT8 or JSA call from Florida, I will simply say I'm from there. It becomes, you have to be able to do it. But calling CQ, you just call CQ, and then you say, well, where are you located? Well, it also helps, as you mentioned, David. Often there's too many people that just exchange signals. This helps in a conversation because you tell them, well, I'm transmitting from Florida, but I'm physically in California. Then you know what? We just got a 5 or 10 minute conversation, but how are you doing that and all that stuff? So it's a way for me to generate a QSO. And one little thing too, when I want to do a QSO on 20 meters, I call CQ for RAG2. You might laugh at that, but I do that. And I got people that answer me, and they answer me and say, oh, I'm so happy because DX stations, CQ, DX, RAG2, there are a lot of stations that want to have a contact with you. They don't want to just exchange 5.9, but today when you do DX, it's, oh, 5.9, thank you, bye, goodbye. So I do that. So I play around and ask for it, and I get people coming back to me. So I just wanted to mention that I don't like the high 5.9 bye. I'm not crazy about that.
Yeah, so if you're into rag chewing and you want to do digital modes, I highly recommend looking at PSK 31.
GSA call also, yeah.
It's a fantastic mode. It's keyboard to keyboard, and a great bunch of guys on PSK, and I've had a lot of fun there. By the way, I worked 15,000 FT8 contacts last year, and 90% or better were all DX, and this year is even better. Like last night, I worked 75 Asian stations in the afternoon. So there's the bands are on 15 meters. The bands are really, really good right now. So, and it's only going to get better in the next couple of years. It's going to peak in 2025 or so. So we're in the upslope, and now is the time to get active on HF. Absolutely, no question about it. Get your antennas up. Even a 40-meter dipole will operate perfectly on 15 meters, and I highly recommend that as a first antenna for anyone. It gives you 2 bands, perfect resonance, and you're off to the races. Anyway, Hugo, did you still have a question, or because your hand is still up? We'll go over to Fred.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't put it down yet.
Yeah. Hey, Fred.
Let's see. Yeah, I think I got it. Great deal about the PSK 31. Again, all you need is a computer and the remote PC, and you can do PSK 31. I do that from the cabin also. I love it. The other thing on your poll, you need to put down a third question. Do you already have the software? I had got that a couple years ago, so I do have the software for the ICOM. But yeah, like you say, the PSK 31, like you say, it's coming back. There's more and more people on PSK 31, and it's great.
Yeah, I just joined this group, PODXS 070 Club, and what they operate is on 7.070, 14.070, 21.070, I think. Yeah, 17 meters has kind of been clobbered by FT8, so the PSK frequency is kind of gone on 17 meters, been clobbered. But for 15 meters or 20 meters is where most people hang out on PSK. It's just very active during the day, and I can get on there and operate for hours and just with chats, people all over the country. I've worked all states. I've worked several DX countries on PSK. It's just a blast. I really, I'm having more fun on PSK than I've had on any mode for a long time. By the way, this weekend is the ARRL International DX sideband contest. So if you want to get on the air, you're going to hear a lot of signals this weekend. Anyway, how are we doing with questions? Bruno, thank you. I wanted to extend a huge, big thank you to you for your presentation. It was absolutely fantastic. I think it stirred a lot of interest for me, getting my station remotable. So I'm going to be calling you, and we'll touch bases on things I need to tweak and fix up here. I have a Nook. I've never really used it. It's new in the box. So I may just set that up with my ICOM 7600 and a dipole or something, and then just use that as a separate station. I do have a solid state amplifier, the KPA 1500. I may just dedicate it to that, or just leave it as a 100-watt radio. So we'll see. But anyway, thank you again. And what I'll do is, if there's no more questions, I'll shut the recording off. I probably should do that.